everybody, and welcome to the Phenomenal Files. Thank you for joining us on this third episode of our Roswell series. This episode, we will be covering Derek's side of the argument. If you are just joining us, our first episode covered the basic history of Roswell, what actually happened, and our second episode was essentially a literary review. We looked through the Twining memo and a collage of different newspaper articles concerning the Roswell incident. This episode is going to cover Derek's side of the argument, what he thinks happened at Roswell. This is not my personal view. I am simply presenting it on his behalf. I will be presenting my case in the next episode, and I hope you will join us for that as well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe for more phenomenal content. Every like helps. We are a new channel and we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. With no further ado, let us begin with Derek's side of the argument. For those who sojourn our website and are familiar with how our investigations typically go, you'd know that Rhiannon and I, in this case, I being Derek, because I am reading his article. So I am Rhiannon, and this is from Derek's point of view. I should have explained that to start with. For those who sojourn our website and are familiar with how our investigations typically go, you'd know that Rhiannon and I will pick a topic to research and discuss. I'll post an article normally, and Rhiannon makes a video on the topic. However, our investigation into the Roswell incident led us to a divergence of opinion on what exactly happened on July 1947. Starting with Kenneth Arnold. The events of July 1947 cannot be discussed without first understanding and discussing the event that took place in Idaho in June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold, a respected businessman and aviator, had an unusual experience that gave birth to the modern conception of UFOs and UFO sightings. While flying over Mount Rainier on a search for a downed plane, for which there was a reward, he saw 9 unusual flying objects traveling at high rates of speed and in unusual directions. He described them as pie pan and crescent-shaped. When asked by a local newspaper, he described the movements of the crafts like a saucer skipping across the water. The newspapers then misquoted him as saying that he had actually seen a flying saucer. Thus, the entire concept of flying saucers, the archetypical UFOs, if you would, came from a misquote. Perhaps innocent, perhaps not. It was on July 7th that Arnold suggested what he had seen may be of extraterrestrial origin. That year also resulted in over 800 other flying saucer sightings and began the commonality of UFO reports. That brings us to July 1947 and Roswell. On June 14, 1947, local rancher Mac Brazel found scattered across his farm a myriad of unusual material. He described it as, quote, a rather large area of bright wreckage made up of rubber strips, tin foil, rather tough paper, and sticks, unquote. He also said that on some pieces there were strange hieroglyph-like markings that could not be made out. There was a foil material which, when wrinkled, would straighten itself out, and there were sticks like balsa wood but harder. The J.M. Foster Ranch, on which Brazel worked, had no electricity, television, or radio, leaving him with no way of knowing about the flying saucer hysteria. It was not until leaving for Corona, New Mexico on July 5th that he heard of flying saucers. Afterward, he connected them with the debris he found on the Foster Ranch. After gathering the material on July 6th, he called the Weather Bureau, who advised him to contact the local sheriff, George Wilcox. Wilcox, being baffled by the debris in turn, contacted the Roswell Army Air Force, who sent out star witness Major Jesse Marcel to the Foster Ranch. Marcel, along with Counterintelligence Corps Officer Sheridan Cavett, ventured to the ranch and gathered as much material as they could and gave testimony similar in description to that of Brazel. Cavett is on record as saying, He found a small black box on the ranch that could not be opened. Afterward, they reported their discovery to Colonel William Blanchard. Blanchard ordered Lieutenant Walter Haut to make a press release alerting the public of the discovery of this flying disc, quote. This subsequent release sparked worldwide interest and frenzy. Blanchard alerted his superior, General Ramey, who ordered the material flown to Fort Worth Army Airfield and quickly dismissed the material as that of a radar target and weather balloon. In the July 9th edition of the Roswell Daily Record, Brazel expressed regret for sharing his find, feeling it had only brought him trouble from the military. He remained firm that while not knowing what he found, he was sure, quote, it wasn't a weather balloon, unquote. After the initial debunking of the event, the Roswell incident was forgotten to the public for nearly 30 years. It was not until ufologist Stanton Friedman in 1978 conducted an interview with Jesse Marcel that the incident was thrust once more into public attention. Marcel denied Ramey's claim, saying that it was not merely a downed weather balloon, but in fact was a flying disc of extraterrestrial origin that the government covered up 30 years prior. Friedman and Marcel both claimed that the material pictured in the July 9th edition of the Roswell Daily Record was a weather balloon, switched out from the real debris. This claim was refuted by Brigadier General Thomas Jefferson Dubois, who hand-delivered the material from the B-29 bomber in a pouch to Ramey's office. From there, we move on to Jesse Marcel himself. The most important witness, one might say the rock star witness, the single reason that we are even discussing the Roswell incident, some 75 years later, is Major Jesse Marcel. Marcel described the material as follows, quote, there was all kinds of stuff, small beams about 3/8 or half-inch square, with some sort of hieroglyphics on them that nobody could decipher. These looked something like balsa wood and were about of the same weight, except they were not wood at all. They were very hard, although flexible, and would not burn. There was a great deal of an unusual parchment-like substance, which were brown in color and extremely strong, and a great number of small pieces like tinfoil, except it wasn't tinfoil. I was interested in electronics and kept looking for something that resembled instruments or electronic equipment, but I didn't find anything. One of the other fellows, Cavett, I think, found a small black box several inches square. As there was no apparent way to open this, and since it didn't appear to be an instrument of any sort, it too was very lightweight, we threw it in with the rest of the stuff. I don't know what eventually happened to that box, but it went along with the rest of the material we eventually took to Fort Worth. Unquote. When one examines Marcel's background, it's easy to see that he is, simply put, an unreliable witness. Marcel claimed to have been a pilot and had been flying since 1928. However, when UFO researcher Cal K. Korff obtained a copy of Marcel's military record, there was no mention of flying experience. In fact, in 1947, in his, quote, reserve office carrier brief, unquote, his flying experience was listed as none, and even Ramey in 1948 said that Marcel was not a rated pilot. This goes against claims that he made to ufologists William Moore and Charles Berlitz, whom he had told he had experience in combat as a pilot, which we know to be untrue. He also stated that he had 5 Purple Hearts when he only had 2. If the star witness Marcel has been shown to be totally unreliable, it casts serious doubt on the resurrections of the alleged flying saucer crash. That being said, was there a government cover-up? Many who believe that an alien spaceship crashed in Roswell will argue the government merely covered the incident up with a weather balloon story. Is this true? Some have said that the material photographed in Ramey's office was switched out with the original material. This would seem strange since Marcel claimed he was photographed with the original material before the switch, yet Ramey clearly is pictured with the same material. As mentioned earlier, Thomas Dubois denied this idea, having personally hand-delivered the material to Ramey. Sheridan Cavett, who accompanied Marcel, said, quote, "I have reviewed the pictures in the 1991 book by Randall and Schmidt on the UFO crash at Roswell, wherein Marcel and Ramey are holding up this material, and it appears to be the same type of material that we picked up from the ranch land." Unquote. Cavett describes the wreckage as follows, quote, "When we got to this location, we subsequently located some debris, which appeared to me to resemble bamboo-type square sticks, 1/4 to 1/2 inch, that were very light, as well as some sort of metallic reflecting material that was also very light. I also vaguely remember some sort of black box, like a weather instrument. The area of this debris was very small, about 20 feet square, and the material was spread on the ground, but there was no gouge or crater or other obvious signs of impact. I remember recognizing this material as being consistent with a weather balloon. We gathered some of this material, which would easily fit into one vehicle. There certainly wasn't a lot of this material, or enough to make up crates of it for multiple flights." Unquote. Cavett clearly thought the wreckage was simply a balloon. Quote, "In short, I did help to recover some debris near Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of July 1947. I thought at the time, and think so now, that the debris was from a crashed balloon." Cavett also saying that, quote, "My bottom line is that this whole incident was no big deal, and it certainly did not involve anything extraterrestrial." Unquote. In a message from the Air Force to the FBI, quote, "The disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by a cable, which balloon was approximately 20 feet in diameter. Major Curtin further advised the object found resembled a high-altitude weather balloon with a radar reflector, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not borne out this belief." Unquote. This is to me very interesting because the material described is certainly not any extraterrestrial vehicle, but much like that of a balloon. But wait, the message clearly says it wasn't. So in other words, the military behind the scenes admits that the wreckage was not a flying disc, but also not a weather balloon. So what was it? Project Mogul, the truth about Roswell. After researching the origin of the saucer craze, we can see that the archetypal UFO, the flying saucer, was merely the result of a newspaper misquote. We also know after the initial debunking by Ramey, the Roswell Incident faded away until the unreliable witness in Marcel brought it back to life 30 years later. This all leads us to question then. What exactly did Brazel find? Was it merely a weather balloon, or was it something else? To understand what happened in Roswell, we also have to understand the era in America, during the late 40s into the 50s. During the Cold War, nothing terrified the U.S. more than the idea that the USSR could develop nuclear weapons that could be used against them. In order to detect potential nuclear explosions from the Soviets, the U.S. government created a top-secret program called Project Mogul. It was so top secret A1 level of classification, that it was the same classification level as the Manhattan Project, which of course was one of the most, that we know of, top secret in American history. In fact, it was so secretive that even Professor Charles Moore, who was a project engineer for Mogul from NYU, did not know the name until being interviewed about it in 1992. Mogul was created to detect atomic explosions from the upper atmosphere. According to Charles Moore, quote, "The idea was proposed in a letter in a 1945 letter from Dr. Ewing to Glenn Spatz, that we might be able to detect nuclear blasts via pressure waves and low-frequency microphones. This was an idea developed from a study of the 1883 Krakatoa explosion, where pressure waves circled the Earth 7 times." Unquote. A Mogul device, therefore, consisted of neoprene balloons tied together, equipped with microphones to detect potential explosions and radar targets so that these devices could be tracked while in flight. When in flight, a Mogul device could be over 600 feet tall, taller than the Washington Monument. In 1994, the U.S. Air Force explained away the Roswell incident as that of a Mogul device. Professor Charles Moore launched many devices from Alamogordo, New Mexico. He believed that the Roswell UFO was an unaccounted for Mogul device. Flight number 4, which was the closest unaccounted for device to Brazil finding the material on June 14th. Flight 4 was launched on June 4th. In several interviews, Moore gives compelling reasons for believing this. In regards to the strange hieroglyphics, quote, I have a specific recollection of reinforcing tape applied to the seams of the reflectors that had some symbols such as arcs, flowers, circles, and diamonds. These were pinkish in color, unquote. The radar targets had the same strange markings on them as previous accounts detail, and according to Moore, were put on the targets by the toy company that manufactured them. The targets had balsa wood frames similar to the sticks or balsa wood material other witnesses attested to. The frames were then coated in glue, making them tougher, probably the reason that Marcel thought they were not in fact balsa wood. The glue would make the pieces somewhat burn resistant, according to Moore. This could account for the stories of the material not being able to be burned. The material straightening itself out could be due to what was dubbed a, quote, paper laminate, according to Moore. Moore said the reflectors being used were atypical to what would have been used in the area before he arrived, which could explain Marcel's confusion. Brazil spoke of finding smoky gray pieces of rubber, which one would expect after a short period of exposure to sunlight, which could explain the downing of the device. After an extended period of time, they would be blackened and charred, as can be seen from the photos in Ramey's office. If one were to examine a Mogul reflector, it would seem very similar to the one pictured in Ramey's office. It hardly seems an accident that Moore's description of the components of the Mogul device matches so closely with the testimony of the witnesses. This seems to me to be the best explanation for the Roswell incident. While I personally would love to find evidence of the government hiding aliens and their spaceships, we cannot absolve ourselves of the responsibility of critical thinking. When we look at the evidence, it seems to answer the Roswell question. While I truly hope to find mystery in this world, as Sherlock Holmes would say, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be truth. Again, let me remind you that this is not my personal opinion. I have presented this on Derek's behalf. And next week, we will be looking at my opinion on the matter, which, let's just say that I am definitely the molder in this situation. After that, we have an extra special episode for you, which I hope you will join us for a Phenomenal Files First. We will both be presenting. We will question each other. We will debate. And most likely, we will continue to disagree with each other. But perhaps one of us may be moved. You never know. Again, thank you for joining us. I hope that you join us again next week. Be sure to subscribe for more phenomenal content every week, or hopefully every week. The ultimate goal is to have a phenomenal Friday every single week, but sometimes that just can't happen. This takes a lot to go into these videos, and I don't actually have any training in video editing. So sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than it appears to be. I hope you enjoyed this episode.